Number 8. 1970 Ford Mustang Twister Special. Estimated value, $150,000. The 1970 Ford Mustang Twister Special is one of those rare muscle cars that exists almost entirely by accident. As the 1970s were just getting underway, a racing organization placed a special order for 96 grabber orange Mustangs. These cars were originally intended to serve as pace cars, along with a handful of limited edition models tied to the event. But right as production was wrapping up, everything fell apart. The racing organization suddenly went out of business, leaving Ford with nearly 100 bright orange Mustangs sitting around with no purpose and no buyer. Instead of letting them fade into obscurity, Ford made a surprisingly clever marketing move. The cars were rebranded as Twister Specials and sent to select dealerships in Kansas, Northwest Arkansas, and Western Missouri, all regions closely associated with Tornado Alley. The name wasn't random. It tied directly into the local identity, making the cars feel exclusive, regional, and special. Under the hood, buyers could choose between two serious engine options. One was a 300-horsepower, 351 cubic inch Cleveland V8. The other was the much larger and more intimidating 428 cubic inch V8. Both engines could be paired with either an automatic transmission or a 4-speed manual, which means production was evenly split. That results in just 24 cars built for each possible configuration. Today, there isn't a single fixed market value for a 1970 Twister Special, largely because they almost never change hands. But based on recent sales, buyers should expect prices hovering around $150,000, assuming the car is authentic and properly documented. 1969 Plymouth Hemi Roadrunner Coupe. Estimated value, $214,500. The legendary 426 Hemi was one of the most intimidating engines Detroit ever put on the street. Rated at 425 horsepower, it carried such a fearsome reputation that rumors still circulate claiming some dealerships would only sell one to the most persistent and convincing customers. And to really understand just how intimidating the Hemi was, you only have to look at how many people actually ordered one. Take the 1969 Plymouth Roadrunner Coupe, for example. With its unmistakable beep-beep horn and cartoon mascot, the Roadrunner was hugely popular by the late 1960s. But when it came time to choose an engine, most buyers played it safe. The majority stuck with the 383 up front, while a smaller group stepped up to the 446 barrel option. Very few, however, were brave enough to check the box for the 4-speed Hemi. According to Mecum, just 194 buyers ordered a 1969 Roadrunner Coupe with the 426 Hemi and a 4-speed manual transmission. That microscopic number instantly made the car one of the rarest muscle machines of its era. When one of these Hemi Roadrunners crossed the auction block in 2023, it hammered for $214,500, proving just how far collectors are willing to go for one of these unicorns. Rarer still is the ultimate version, the Hemi Roadrunner Convertible. Only 12 were ever built. They're so scarce, in fact, that we couldn't even track down a photograph to include. 1969 Plymouth Hemi GTX Convertible, $230,000. The Plymouth Hemi GTX represented the luxury side of Mopar muscle. While the Roadrunner focused on raw performance and stripped-down attitude, the GTX was designed for buyers who wanted serious speed wrapped in comfort, style, and a long list of available options. The legendary 426 Hemi V8 was technically available for the GTX, rated at 425 horsepower. But just like with most Hemi-equipped cars, very few buyers were bold enough, or wealthy enough, to check that box, making the combination extraordinarily rare from the start. According to Mecum, only 11 Hemi GTX convertibles were built for the 1969 model year. Of those, just 6 left the factory with an automatic transmission, making them even more elusive. These weren't bare-bones muscle cars either. Buyers could load them up with features like a power-operated convertible top, factory electric windows, front bucket seats, a performance indicator vacuum gauge, variable speed windshield wipers, and even a 150-mile-per-hour speedometer. When one of those 11 convertible Hemi GTX models surfaced for sale in 2020, the asking price climbed to $230,000. Even at that figure, the car ultimately failed to find a buyer. A reminder that rarity alone doesn't always guarantee a sale, even in the ultra-elite world of Hemi Mopars. 1970, Dodge Coronet RT Hemi, $247,500. The Hemi engine may be legendary today, but back in 1970, it wasn't exactly a crowd favorite. Dodge and Plymouth were still cranking out muscle cars by the tens of thousands as the new decade began. Yet according to Mecum auctions, only around 1,500 of those cars left the factory with the mighty Elephant engine under the hood. There were a few reasons for that. The 426 cubic inch Hemi was an expensive option at the time, and by the early 70s, the golden era of muscle cars was already starting to fade. Rising insurance costs, tightening regulations, and shifting buyer attitudes meant most customers were perfectly happy settling for smaller, more affordable V8 engines. And out of those roughly 1,500 Hemi-powered cars, almost none ended up in the Dodge Coronet. In fact, Dodge built just 13 Coronet Hemi RT models for the 1970 model year, according to Mecum. That microscopic production figure alone puts it in the conversation as one of the rarest muscle cars ever built. It gets even more extreme from there. Only 4 Coronet RT hardtops were ordered with the Hemi engine paired to a 4-speed manual transmission. And when it comes to convertibles, it's believed that just a single Coronet RT Hemi drop top was ever produced. These cars packed 425 horsepower and a staggering 490 pound-feet of torque. And when one of the manual transmission examples crossed the Mecum auction block in 2023, it sold for $247,500, a price that reflects just how mythical these cars have become. 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt, estimated value $253,000. The Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt burst onto the scene in 1964 as a purpose-built weapon for the drag strip. Under the hood sat a massive 427 cubic inch FEV8 topped with dual 4-barrel carburetors and designed to deliver brutal, straight-line performance. Officially, Ford rated the Thunderbolt at 425 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque. Unofficially, many insiders believe the real output was far higher, possibly closer to 500 or even 600 horsepower. The Thunderbolt existed for one reason: competition. In the early 1960s, Ford's go-to drag racer was the Galaxy. But against lightweight Super Duty Pontiacs and max wedge Mopars, the Galaxy was simply too heavy to stay competitive. Ford needed something smaller, lighter, and far more aggressive. That answer came in the form of the Fairlane 500. Cars left the production line stripped of non-essential comforts like heaters, sound-deadening material, and even radios. From there, they were sent to Dearborn steel tubing, where the engine bay was extensively reworked to accept the oversized 427 engine borrowed from the Galaxy. Once completed, the Fairlane Thunderbolt tipped the scales at roughly 3,200 pounds, right at the NHRA minimum weight required to compete in the superstock class. In total, just 100 Thunderbolts were produced. Of those, 51 were equipped with automatic transmissions, while 49 left the factory with manual gearboxes. Today, the Thunderbolt is one of the most respected factory drag cars ever built. According to Classic.com, the average value of a 1964 Fairlane Thunderbolt sits around $253,000, cementing its status as a blue-chip piece of American muscle history. 1963 Chevrolet Impala Z11, $296,000. 1963 was a downright wild year for drag racing. This was the era when so-called Swiss cheese Catalinas were ripping up the asphalt, cars drilled full of lightning holes, to the point where it was sometimes hard to tell whether there was more metal missing than still intact. It was also the year Chevrolet unleashed one of its most extreme factory creations, the Impala Z11. Chevrolet's regular production option code Z11 unlocked a very special version of the W Series engine. It started life as a 409, but engineers pushed displacement all the way to 427 cubic inches. That jump came courtesy of a longer 3.65-inch stroke crankshaft, working inside the 4.3125-inch bore of the standard 409 block. Officially, the Z11 was rated at 430 horsepower. But as was common practice in the early 1960s, that number was widely believed to be conservative. Many enthusiasts and historians suggest the real output was much higher, potentially in the neighborhood of 500 horsepower or more. Power was sent through a Borg-Warner T10 4-speed manual gearbox, and stopping duties were handled by heavy-duty brakes borrowed directly from the Corvette Z06. According to Haggerty, a total of 57 Impala Z11 models were built, but only 25 were produced for the 1963 model year. Today, each one is valued at roughly $296,000 in good condition, making the Z11 one of the most coveted drag-era Chevrolets ever created. 1967 Ford Shelby GT 500 Super Snake, estimated value $2.2 million. In 1967, Carroll Shelby took the Ford Mustang to an entirely new level by dropping a modified 428 cubic-inch Police Interceptor V8 under the hood. Shelby created the very first GT 500, a brutal 355 horsepower machine that transformed Ford's pony car into a true muscle legend. The GT 500 was a success almost immediately. According to Coupe auctions, Ford sold 2,048 examples, proving there was real demand for Shelby's vision. But lurking beyond the standard GT 500 was something far more extreme, a version so rare that only one was ever built. That car was the GT 500 Super Snake. Created specifically for a Goodyear tire promotional event, the Super Snake was engineered to run 500 miles at an average speed of 142 miles per hour, demonstrating the durability of Goodyear's new Thunderbolt tire. To make that possible, Shelby installed a purpose-built GT40 Mark II 427 engine, producing an astonishing 600 horsepower, along with a host of performance upgrades throughout the car. This one-of-one Super Snake became an instant legend, and when it crossed the auction block in 2019, it sold for $2.2 million, making it the most expensive Mustang ever sold at the time. 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible, estimated value $3.5 million. The Plymouth Barracuda had only been on the market since 1964, but by 1971, it already felt like the end of the road. The muscle car era was rapidly shrinking, with an oil crisis looming and stricter emissions regulations right around the corner. Plymouth refreshed the Barracuda with a redesigned front end, but it wasn't enough to stop the slide. Sales collapsed from 55,499 units to just 18,690, according to Haggerty. And as often happens when demand falls off a cliff, certain trims and engine combinations were quietly transformed into future legends. One of the most extreme examples is the 1971 Hemi Cuda Convertible. The final year buyers could still order the legendary 426 engine. In total, just 12 Hemi Cuda convertibles were built. Only 7 were intended for the United States market, while the remaining 5 were exported overseas. And according to Haggerty, just 3 of those 12 were equipped with a 4-speed manual transmission. Each of these drop-top muscle cars packed 425 horsepower, and today they exist in a financial universe of their own. One sold for $3,500,000 in 2015. Another example, the one you see here, reached an eye-watering $4,800,000 at auction in 2021, although it ultimately failed to sell.